Hi everyone. In this lecture, focusing on Northern European painting of the 15th century, I want to focus on the work of Jan van Eyck in particular, and even more in particular in the focusing on the Ghent Altarpiece, a very, very large polyptych completed in 1432 and currently located in the Cathedral of St. Bavo in the city of Ghent. Now, it is worth pointing out that the earlier name of the cathedral, or it really wasn't a cathedral, it was just the parish church of St. John in Ghent, in one of the most wealthy and powerful districts in the city. And that has some bearing on some of the imagery in the text, particularly that relating to St. John. We'll discuss that a little bit more in detail moving forward. So the circumstances of the panel's manufacture, that is all of them. It's a very, very large painting indeed. When it's open, nearly 12 feet tall and 15 feet across. The circumstances of this painting's manufacture are shrouded, I think, in a considerable amount of mystery. One of the more tantalizing bits of information about the panel is that it was created by Hubert van Eyck and Jan van Eyck together. And the problem with this is that we don't really have any solid information on who Hubert van Eyck was, or any other paintings by him, or any clear way of deducing or understanding what Hubert's contribution may have been to this. Of Jan van Eyck's work, we have a fairly good idea. There are a number of extant panel paintings. I think the number is somewhere between 15 or 20, depending on whom you talk to. But with Hubert van Eyck, the record is very, very spotty indeed, which is somewhat surprising given the prominence of Jan van Eyck and the fame that this particular altarpiece enjoyed even in its own time. The subsequent history of the altarpiece is fascinating, with a number of episodes involving theft of various panels. I think it was stolen respectively by Napoleon and Hitler. There are any number of necessary restorations owing to fire, what have you. It's a very complex history, and gives us some indication when we look at something that there's generally a great deal more than meets the eye, literally in terms of the physical state of the painting and what it's gone through to get to where we see it today. So in essence, it's a spectacular painting, in many ways a sort of summation of the achievements in oil painting in the 15th century. To begin with, it's worth pointing out that the painting is composed of multiple panels, and indeed it exists in multiple states. We'll begin by looking at the outward state, the version that we would see on any given day of the week, if it wasn't a particular special one, such as Sunday or Saint's Feast Day or something like this. And so the exterior of it, when it's folded shut, is relatively subdued in terms of color and action and number of figures and so forth. We'll go into more detail as to what's actually happening here, but suffice it to say the sort of normal everyday state of the painting is considerably different from that found in the interior. Once it's fully opened up, we see a really resplendent collection of images, rich hues, lots and lots of figures, and so forth. So that sense of revealing something hidden is very, very strong in the circumstances of the construction of the painting, its arrangement, and so forth. So that's, I think, important to understand, that the painting exists in multiple states and should be handled in that way. So now that we have a little bit of idea of the background of the painting itself, we probably should dig just a little bit deeper into Jan van Eyck's working methods, and just a quick refresher on the role of oil painting in 15th century European art. The most significant contribution, I think, of 15th century art in terms of developing painting was probably the supreme achievement of Jan van Eyck in really exploiting all the potential of oil painting. To do this, he's working in a variety of different modes, but most typically he would begin with a what's known as a grisaille, Grisaille, a black and white underpainting of one kind or another. In other words, it could have shades of gray, what have you, hence the name grisaille, that would suffice to give a compositional outline and also define the range of light and dark involved in the painting. We can see this in the two fictive statues at the bottom. On the left, John the Baptist right here, and then on the right, John the Evangelist. And then what Jan van Eyck would do typically is go over that grisaille image with various layers of translucent paint in a process called glazing to establish rich, saturated hues, typically red or blue or green, especially in the drapery of the figures, and begin to develop a sense of relief and color really, really strongly over a series of different layers. And then start adding in highlights and other color as necessary. So the sense of building up a picture, painting from a black and white beginning is very, very strong in virtually all of Jan van Eyck's work. Throughout, I think, in Northern European painting, the focus is on developing a sense of the sort of tactile, immediate appearance of light hitting surfaces. So there's a very empirically grounded aspect to Northern European art which will emerge in this painting, even though it is depicting places and times that are well beyond that of normal experience for the most part. So that's Jan van Eyck's working method. Again, very painstaking process on a very carefully constructed panel. It's not a improvised or a particularly expressive technique in terms of application of paint. It's also worth pointing out that the actual panel itself would have been very carefully planned, although I don't think we have the contract information for this painting, and art historians would love to have that. Very typically in productions of this kind, there'd be an extensive list of requirements for the artist, right down to the quality of pigments used, date of delivery, use of apprentices, and what have you. That would be certainly helpful in figuring out what Hubert van Eyck, for instance, if he actually participated in this painting, what kind of role he was expected to have. Did Jan van Eyck, for instance, take over after something happened to Hubert? The records, again, don't really show us anything, but it would be wonderful to know. So very carefully constructed, essentially like carpentry, woodworking the process of manufacture for the panels, the frame, all that kind of thing. The original frames, I think, are for the most part lost on the Ghent Altarpiece. So let's begin thinking about the role of this painting. In essence, it serves to depict in vivid pictorial terms the fundamental principle of Christian thought, and that is the redemption of humanity through the sacrifice of Christ, the sacrifice by God of Christ. And the whole idea of Christian theology, and particularly in the time that we're speaking, but I think it still holds true in the present, is to, in essence, trace a kind of narrative, a timeline almost, from the beginnings of creation, going all the way back to the book of Genesis, through what we might describe as the Hebrew Bible, to the arrival of Christ. And that's where the potential, in a sense, for universal salvation is seen as far as mainstream Christian thought is concerned. And then there's the story of Christ's ministry, his persecution, his execution, his resurrection. And then there's obviously following the sort of organization of the Bible, the Acts of the Apostles in terms of spreading the word of Christ. And the process ultimately culminates, once we're past the four Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, in the book of Revelations, which is in essence the end of human history, the establishment of Christ's kingdom on earth, and in essence the redemption of all humanity, the immortality, I suppose, of the saved, the condemnation of the damned in the last judgment. So this sense of a narrative trajectory, a narrative flow, is really vitally important in Christian art in general, and certainly in the Ghent Altarpiece. So as we look at the exterior of the Ghent Altarpiece, what we're seeing is the beginning of that story. Okay, and one way of beginning to think about this, as I've already mentioned, the altarpiece opens and closes, is a shift from secular space and time, the space and time that we inhabit, that we see, and a shift toward sacred space and eternity. Okay, so that's an important shift that's going to happen as we open this piece. So the focus on space and time and the believable depiction of space and time, I think, is part of the Flemish painting project. It's worth keeping that theme in mind. So as we look at this particular organization here, we see a number of things emerge. For starters, what we're seeing is at the very top of the frame, and let's just close in on that just a little bit here. You can see images of prophets and sibyls, and these are figures in the Christian tradition who foretell the coming of Christ. So let's just look at those briefly. We can see them. They're different identifications. You know, the prophet Isaiah, for instance, is a standard figure. Elijah, what have you. The sibyls being pagan figures, but valued in the Christian tradition, particularly this time for predicting, in essence, the arrival of Christ. These sibyls, for instance, are seen elsewhere, most famously in Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling. Now, at the very top, you can see them with speech scrolls. This is a traditional way of showing the pronouncements, the utterances of these prophets. And they are, the two prophets on the left and the right are looking through books, right? The books which presumably they are producing, reading out of, announcing, like for instance the prophet Isaiah, they're foretelling the arrival of Christ. And the same thing with the sibyls. Their utterance predicts the future. So that's important, obviously, for this emphasis on history and narrative. Now, if we go down one story, so to speak, and that I think the metaphor is valid because we actually come into an architectural interior just below, we see the archangel Gabriel delivering the Annunciation to Mary. And so that sense of foretelling, I think, is important at the upper register, and then in this middle area right here. And indeed, we can literally see a story, right? That is to say, an architectural story, a floor, ceiling, what have you. And as is a feature, not an uncommon one in Flemish art, we can zoom in just a little bit in the back. We can see an exterior that looks out into a typical street, like we might see, for instance, in medieval Ghent. So that's again, that sense of trying to situate all of this in contemporary space and time, I think, is important. Okay, so it's both sacred and secular space. So there's a beautifully rendered angel with iridescent wings, telling Mary the good news that she's going to have Christ, that she's going to be pregnant with the Holy Spirit. And as we look out, let me just zoom back out here again just a little bit. We can see the words, not speech scrolls this time, but literally words. You know, Hail Mary, full of grace, addressed to Mary, and the Holy Spirit alights on Mary's head right here, and she replies in words that are upside down. You can see this: "Behold, the handmaiden of God." Okay, and she has been looking at presumably a book of hours or a book of prayer of some kind, right? And again, a gesture of humility. She accepts her destiny, and that's going to be important, that sense of destiny. So in the exterior of this, we have this sense, again, of events moving forward. There's a substantial number of standard kind of Marian symbols that we see elsewhere in Flemish art. So, for instance, that white cloth right here, the vessel, the sense of light coming through a window, and so on and so forth. So this should be pretty familiar to students of the Flemish art. Okay. If we go down one more story, one more register, so let's just sort of pan down to that, we can see a number of figures, and these are arranged almost like both live and sculptural figures are arranged in a similar fashion, like they're part of architecture, like the sort of foundational pillars holding up the enterprise. They serve, in a sense, a kind of inferior position compared to the miracle happening above, but they're obviously very important. On the left and the right, we see sort of exterior to the statues, the patrons of the painting. Jodocus Vid on the left, and I think it's Isabella Borlet on the right. These are very, very highly placed citizens of Ghent who would have been responsible for the commissioning of this work. And we see them in a stance of prayer, and indeed this chapel was probably endowed with perpetual prayer for the souls of the patron. And they flank two statues, which, as I've already mentioned before, are the statues of John the Baptist right here. He's identified most easily by his lamb right here and his wild animal skin robe underneath that drapery. If we move a little bit to the right, we can see John the Evangelist, who's holding a cup with snakes in it, referring to an episode where he drinks poison and survives that peril. Now, both John the Evangelist and John the Baptist are important. I've already mentioned, for instance, that presence of the Church of St. John. But they're also important in terms of the overall scheme of the painting, and particularly with that aspect of narration and prediction. So, for instance, there's the famous line from John the Baptist where he says, describes the voice in the wilderness and the Lamb of God. Okay, so he in essence anticipates this theme of sacrifice, again holding the lamb that he points to. And of course, John the Evangelist is famed as the author of the fourth gospel, the book of John, where he describes the nature of Christ, very different from the other gospels, the so-called synoptic gospels, which focus on the life of Christ, and of course is also regarded as the author of the book of Revelation. So both figures are famed for their relationship to Christ. John the Baptist baptizes Christ, and John the Evangelist forecasts the second coming of Christ. And therefore this all ties very nicely with the scenes directly above. So that's worth keeping in mind as we look at the entire ensemble, how it all ties together and in essence puts the viewer in a state of spiritual anticipation. So that, I think, is a good summary of the exterior. Now, as we look at the interior, as it's opened out, we see, in essence, a splendid vision of paradise, particularly in the bottom series of images, a vision of the kingdom to come, the New Jerusalem, in essence. And there are many allusions, essentially, to that perfection of the New Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to start, I think, with that central lower panel right now to give us a sense of what's going on, and remembering that if somebody was looking at this altarpiece, that would be the kind of central, most accessible vision. So let's just close in just a little bit tighter on that, see what we can do here. Okay, very good. And let me just pan out just a little bit. So as we, oops, let me just do that one more. Okay. So as we look at this scene here, and the focus is clearly on this altar-like object in the center, with a lamb, the mystic lamb, right, of the Eucharist. This painting is really all about communion and the inherent potential for salvation that's in that. So the altar of the lamb, and you can see a wound in the chest of the lamb that issues forth blood that's collected in a chalice. You can see that this altar is flanked by angels, and let's actually just zoom in a little bit tighter on that. Okay. And indeed, you can see on the altar in gold the words "Behold the Lamb of God." I think if we go in a little bit closer, we can see that without too much trouble. Ecce Agnus and so Dei. And you can see that there are all these angels around the Lamb with instruments of the Passion. So, for instance, the cross, the crown of thorns, and what have you. So that is abundantly obvious what the Lamb represents Christ. Okay. If we pull back a little bit further, we can see, very interestingly, an octagonal fountain. Okay, and the idea of Christ being a kind of fountain of life, a fons vitae, is particularly important, and it's also linked, I think, with the book of Revelations. Okay, the pure river of the water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb, from the book of Revelations. This scene here is flanked by images, for instance, of figures such as martyrs of the church. Okay, and these individuals are generally reckoned to be apostles. We have other worthies of the ancient world, including what appears to be, if we just zoom in here really quickly on the left here, the poet Virgil, for instance, right, famed for his guiding Dante through the Divine Comedy. There are a number of other figures of this kind. As I've already mentioned, if we just swing across to the right, we can see various martyrs. For instance, Saint Stephen here with the marks of his, the attributes, I should say, of his martyrdom, these stones that he's carrying in his costume. Another saint here carrying a tongue, part of the process of martyrdom. These figures are dressed in red to convey the message that they have indeed paid that ultimate price for their faith. If we go up just a little bit higher here, we can see female confessors of the church, including such well-known characters as Saint Ursula and what have you, Saint Barbara, for instance, with the tower right here. That's visible. Let's let that load right there. And then on the other side again, we go all the way across. The confessors of the church, they're not necessarily martyrs. They come out of this gorgeous bank of foliage here. Again, Marian imagery with roses and what have you. And art historians and basically botanists have identified all these plants. They come out of the undergrowth there. And let's just zoom out just a little bit and see another interesting group of people further outside that central frame. The knights of the Christian church right here. You can zoom in on them. And the just judges on this side. It's worth pointing out that this panel here on the left is a reconstruction, a 20th century reconstruction. Going back over to the right, we can see the image of, especially on the right here, pilgrims, okay, and led by the mighty giant Saint Christopher. And they're identifiable. For instance, this character right here wears on his forehead the shell, the cockle shell, that would have been carried by visitors to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. So it's really quite an extraordinary crew here. Hermits, pilgrims, judges, knights, martyrs, all kinds of things being represented here, all kinds of figures. It's a really remarkable ensemble on many, many levels, both theological and actual. And then in the upper story, and we can close in on this, I think, very nicely as well. In the upper story, we naturally are drawn to the striking figure on the throne. And it's still, to a certain degree, unclear as to who this actually might be. If we look, there seems to be some sort of identifying inscription directly above, rendered in beautiful sort of tour de force of paint. If you go in closer, you can see the actual behavior of light and reflection. And what it seems to say is, here is God, most powerful in divine majesty, etc. The trick in terms of understanding who this might actually be is that it's very rare for God the Father to be flanked by the two individuals that are present, and that's Mary, often in an intercessor role, and John the Baptist. And again, remember that this this church was originally in the parish of St. John, and that might be why it's prominent to see John the Baptist. But John the Baptist is never really seen that close in most examples of European art, that close to God. So he's God, or maybe more likely it's a representation of Jesus enthroned in his second coming, a kind of sense, again, of that last judgment as he judges the elect and the damned alike. And again, Mary at his right hand as an intercessor, beautifully depicted here, reading out of a book that would have been very identifiable to any viewer, right? With books with their beautiful coverings and that kind of thing, when books were very, very valuable. This is prior to the age of printing still. Mary is dressed in extraordinary garments, vestments bedecked with gold and jewels, pearls, rubies, emeralds, what have you. If we go just a little bit higher, we can see her extraordinarily resplendent crown. And art historians have seen very close parallels with jewelry and enamel work that this crown resembles. Again, identifying inscription is above. Extraordinarily fine work. If we go over to the image of John the Baptist, the same sense of very, very tight detail, extraordinarily precise working. John the Baptist wouldn't typically be shown with too much in the way of finery, but he does indeed get his beautiful green cloak with pearls and what have you around the rim. If we look even closer, for instance, details of the background of God, you can see it's let me just go a little bit tighter here as he raises his right hand. You can see this little emblem right here of mercy. Okay, the pelican feeding its young by scratching its breast until it bleeds, and this is something that feeds the pelicans. You can see also representations of grapes. These are very typical symbols associated with Christ as this image of sacrifice. Further apart, on the far sides of the image are in the same way that the patrons in the exterior segregated to the sides are the images of Adam and Eve. Okay, the generators, as it were, of original sin, and they are shown here naked and very kind of human in a sense, almost a deliberate contrast against the resplendent vision that they look at. And there is that sense in this painting that Christian belief redeems the original sin, the corruption, the downfall, the mortality of man, and gives way to this extraordinarily beautiful vision. And it's worth implying, and this would have been readily recognized within the church, not just vision, but sound. So, for instance, we can see, if we close in just a little bit on these angels, an angel in a beautiful robe right here, again, the extraordinary handling of light, an angel playing on an organ, a pipe organ, again, appearances in terms of the handling of light. And if we look a little bit to the side right here, we can see angels playing instruments of various kinds, harps and what have you. And then on the other side, let me just go down a little bit here. Hang on a second, I'm on the wrong side. On the other side, we can see a choir, a heavenly choir, reading out of a hymnal, and the remarkable degree to which the painter has rendered various tones and emotional expressions as they're trying to sing for the glory of God. And again, a beautiful rendition of the book stand and how that actually would function, say, in a church. It appears to be on a kind of swivel so that people can easily access it. So there's this really quite remarkable range, I suppose, of objects, figures, locations. Again, Jerusalem, the beautiful. Let's just look as we wrap up. Look at the landscape, for instance, that's in the background. Jan van Eyck was one of the great pioneers in early European landscape painting for his ability to suggest depth and light and atmosphere. All in all, the painting is a striking evocation of paradise and the potential for human redemption thanks to the sacrifice of Christ. It really stands, the Ghent Altarpiece, as one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of Western art, and really world art in general, for encapsulating so completely a vision of the spirit, a vision of humanity, religion in general, Christian doctrine in particular. And it stands today as one of the great achievements, certainly of the 15th century, if not for all time.